welcome to A Preacher and His Work. I'm your host, Mark Teskey, and I have with me today Ron Brown. Ron's been a missionary in China for several years and several other countries before that. Ron, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Pleased to be here today.
So 19 years in China, the most populous country in the world. Tell us a little bit about your time there in China.
Well, I started in China in 1998, and the reason I started in China was I was a missionary to Montreal, Quebec, Canada for 7 years. I was a missionary there long enough that I received Canadian citizenship. So I have dual citizenship with Canada and the United States. And while I was there with the Lachine Church of Christ in Montreal, which later became the Greater Montreal Church of Christ, I had Chinese students at McGill and at Concordia universities in Montreal that came from mainland China that wanted to get their master's degree or MBA degree, but their English was not up to par. So I started a school at the church for these Chinese students. Well, as I was teaching them Chinese teaching them English, they said, well, we'll teach you Mandarin then. And they taught me what Mandarin I do know, which is not enough, but it makes it okay. From there, we converted them and we established a congregation, a Chinese congregation in Montreal. And I decided that I would move to another location. Well, I went to China to make a survey to see if we could work in China. And everybody in the United States kind of laughed and said, no, you can't work in mainland China.
Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of rumors that you can't have a church there, and everything has to be underground, and definitely would like to talk a little bit about that, because it's to many people it's kind of impenetrable, the great figurative wall of China that we have with the gospel.
That's correct. And to some degree, that's true. A lot of that is true. It has not been easy. I would not say that it was ever easy. But because we were doing the humanitarian aid, because we were taking care of orphans, at one point we were caring for 600 orphans at 6 different orphanages that I constructed in China. And we were doing open heart surgery, we were doing cleft palate surgery, we were doing all burn surgeries we brought many children to the United States, to the burn center, the Shriners Burn Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Because we were doing these things to help the people, and the people saw that we were helping a lot, they became a little more cooperative. In fact, sometimes they would actually, turn their backs and not see what was happening. And that's still happening today to some degree. But about 9 years ago, I established the first legal Church of Christ in China, the Beijing Church of Christ. And it still exists. We don't know how long it will exist because, the government is not that happy with Christianity in China. And there's a reason. There are approximately 83,000 members of the Communist Party. Well, the estimates for people who believe in Jesus Christ ranges from 30 million to 300 million. Who knows what the number is, because there's no way to really get an accurate count of the people who believe in Jesus Christ. Now, that's all religions that believe in Christ. That excludes those that do not believe in Christ. So if you were head of the Communist Party, how would you feel if you were so outnumbered by people who believe in Christ, and you don't believe in Christ, and you believe in the communist doctrine that's perpetuated by the government and it stays alive because of the government. So the churches of Christ in general in China are what we call house churches. And usually they're small. There are some areas where there are difficulties. There are some areas where there are no difficulties. In the area around certain cities, the police will hear of a meeting that's going on. And they'll come and they'll say, would you mind dividing this into 2 groups? You're getting too large. And you divide it into 2 groups. And that's no problem. It's still a house church.
Okay.
So the house churches have grown very rapidly in China. The major future growth of the churches of Christ will be outside the United States. You know, that hurts, and we hate to admit it, but that is the case. And Asia will be the center of Christianity. By the year 2030, some project as early as 2025. There may be more believers in Christ in China than any nation of the world by the year 2025. So the opportunities to serve God and to live the Christian life are going to be fantastic for the people of Asia. Very hungry for the gospel, very hungry. Now, that'll take a lot of work.
Definitely. So the congregation there in Beijing is recognized by the government. What does it take to be officially recognized by the government there?
Well, the reason we accomplished it, and it was not an easy accomplishment either, was the fact that we had done all this work, that humanitarian work. And because of that, they at first said, no, you just join the Three Selves movement. That's the government-controlled church in China, Three Selves. I said, no, we don't agree with their doctrine. We don't agree with their being under the government and overseen by the government. And finally, after I don't know how many times a meeting with my attorney with us at the meeting, we finally came to the point they said, okay, you can become legal. And we were happy. But then when they asked us, would you like to have a website? I couldn't believe it. And of course we said, yes, we'd like to have a website. That website has been up and has everything about the plan of salvation, about the meetings, about everything ever since that day.
Oh.
Now, in the past year has been the most severe persecution that has existed in China. And I'm sure the Chinese will admit it, that they have really applied the pressure on the believers in Christ. And they have torn down many church buildings of denominations. We have no church buildings. We lease space in Beijing for the church. All the house churches will meet in apartments or meet in some place. And sometimes the cities are not very receptive to Christianity.
Any idea what's brought on this intense persecution?
A fear of Christianity taking over communism. That's the major fear. They have a great fear that here our people, they're talking about the Chinese people, are believing in Jesus Christ and believing in Christianity. That's in total opposition to communism, of course. So that is creating a lot of friction and a lot of uncertainty with the government about what is going to happen next. They know the projections that Christianity, or believers in Christ, is going to continue to grow. And they don't know that the more you persecute, the more it's going to grow. So, you know, I don't know what the end result will be, but I do know that our churches are strong. They're more dedicated than the Christians in the United States to their faith, because they're putting their lives at risk when they become a member of the Lord's church. And that's not easy.
And that's, you know, one thing with the situation here in the United States with some of the social and political changes that we're seeing here, that persecution of Christians in the U.S. is getting closer and closer to reality. And that may be for the benefit of the church because, like you said, persecute the church and it grows.
Exactly.
People have to be more dedicated.
We've seen it in the past. We've seen it back when we go back and study New Testament history.
The book of Acts.
That's correct.
Every time you persecute the church, it grows.
And there's no question that, not in my lifetime, probably not in yours, there will be persecution of Christians. There is persecution beginning today. Just every time I see the news or look at the newspapers or something and see what's happening, I find it hard to believe.
Absolutely. And when we look at China, you know, other than the congregation of Beijing, you've got house churches, you've got underground churches, informal meetings of Christians happening. It seems to be effective. How though can folks here in the U.S. help those Christians and help them to grow? And do they need it?
To some degree, they need help, but the people from the United States do not understand the situation in China. So many times I'll have people that'll write me and say, hey, I'm going to China, and you've been referred to as for me to contact to get information about going to China. And I'll tell them every time, do not go to an illegal congregation. Because if the police should come in and make a raid, which has happened, not many times, but many other groups it has happened to,
mm-hmm.
the American's passport would be marked that they must be out of the country within 24 hours. But what about the poor Chinese that are members of the Lord's church there? They're persecuted, they're mistreated, they're beaten, and can even be put in prison. I don't think we've ever had any put in prison, but the abuse is still difficult. So, what the Americans can do is stay away from meetings. Go to a group that they can find, and you can find groups that are Americans. Well, there are over 10,000 Americans living in Beijing, China.
Mm-hmm.
You can find groups that would meet, and you could go to the Beijing church. But regretfully, we don't have legal congregations all over China, and I doubt that we ever will. Now, they can help by then protecting the Chinese Christians in China. Don't expose them. Number two, they can help with Save Asian Souls by sponsoring a child that is an orphan that could be trafficked. They can help by contributing to the medical work that we're doing, and that keeps goodwill with the government, of course. We do open heart surgery, do cleft palate surgery, do burn rehabilitation and skin grafts and everything. So there are things. Now, as far as the actual congregation needing help, they don't really need any help. They meet in apartments.
Mm-hmm.
There are more Bibles printed in China than any nation of the world, but they're exported. But we can buy Bibles for a few dollars a piece. Now, some years ago, I know that there were many groups in the United States who were trying to smuggle Bibles into China. Well, it was not necessary, but they did it anyway. We have all the Christian bookstores throughout the major cities of China that people can go to and buy Christian literature for their children. They can buy Bibles easily. We buy the Bibles and we give every orphan a Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important. So as far as helping the individual congregations, the only thing they could do is support the Beijing Church of Christ, which is the legal Church of Christ recognized by the government. Now, we have a problem keeping ministers because of the tremendous culture shock. So we're looking for a minister right now from a third world country that will go to Beijing, because we don't have a minister right now, and serve as the minister there.
Mm-hmm.
Because the agreement with the government is that we would have a minister from outside of China to conduct the services and to carry on the activities of a local congregation in Beijing. That congregation, of course, does need support.
Mm-hmm. So from what I take it, there's the Beijing congregation, and you talked some about this benevolence work, the medical work that's going on. How does that process work?
Okay. We have our people on the ground in China that are working with the house churches.
Mm-hmm.
We have the government that also refers patients to us. We have hospitals in China that we have done open heart surgery with for many years. And they will come up on cases that the people have no money, they can't pay for the surgery, they will refer them to us. We, in turn, will take their files. I just took a file yesterday, or day before yesterday, I guess, and sent it to Heart Gift in Austin, Texas, which is a very good foundation that does nothing but open heart surgeries, and asked them to look at this case. Is this a case they could take? Maybe it's a VSD, a PDA, or tetralogy of Fallot. These are all different types of heart diseases that a child is born with this. It's a congenital defect. And in some areas of China, 95% of all the children that are born with congenital heart disease will die. So, you know, it's horrible. So we take the case, we find the hospital in the United States that will take the case. We contact American Airlines. American Airlines flies them to the United States free of charge. We have to get them a visa. We have to get them from their hometown to Shanghai or Beijing, locations where American flies. Airline ambassadors, which is a association of flight attendants, provides us with a flight attendant to go and pick the child up and bring the child to the United States. All we have to do is pay the hotel fee.
Wow.
So our cost is about $1,000 probably per patient to save their lives. They will have a normal life when they return back to China. And Airline Ambassadors supplies us a flight attendant to fly the child back.
So this is a collaborative effort, but the bottom line is $1,000 for open heart surgery to save a child's life.
That's right.
That's unheard of.
That's right. It's about $50,000 for an open heart surgery in the United States.
At least, yeah.
Depending on the severity of the case, of course.
Wow.
Then burn surgeries, we've had, I don't know how many children come for burn surgeries at the Shriners Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio, and at other locations also.
Fantastic. So that takes care of some of the medical issues. And you talked a little bit about orphans. What's the orphan situation like in China?
Okay. Well, the situation is improving. I will say that. The economy of China has been good. It's not superior to what it has been or could be. But it is improving, and it is very slowly trickling down to the very poor people. You go into Shanghai or Beijing and you see a beautiful city, very modern city. But you just step outside the city limits and you see severe poverty. The government says there are about 700,000 orphans in China, but they do not consider a child an orphan unless the husband and the wife are both dead. So many times the father will die, and when the father dies, the wife gets rid of the child and she goes to another province to marry another man. Now, she cannot take the child with her because no man will marry her with one child. He wants the one child to be his child. Now, the two-child policy is in effect now in China, but it's still restricted. So there we have orphans. We call them orphans because the mother has left, the father has died. So we take them in, and we've had up to 600 orphans at one time that cared for. I built 6 orphanages in China in the past 19 years. 5 of them are still operating. So these children would need help, of course. They need support from people in the United States.
And how much does it cost to support one of these orphans in a home?
Usually it's about $30 a month. Now, sometimes, some of the orphans that we have are between, most that we are concerned with right now is between age of 12 and 20. Sometimes we have to, if they have no education, and most of them do not, they have failed in school, they can't make the grade, but they still need to have a vocational education in order to be successful in the economy. So we send them to vocational education school where they can learn a occupation. It may be hotel management, it may be a cook, it may be a hairdresser, it may be an orderly at a hospital. We have girls that are involved in all of those different areas. And $30 a month will cover some of them. Some of them that are going to medical school to be orderlies in a hospital, it's going to take more than $30. Sometimes we will have to assign 2 sponsors to that child. So we need funds for that, of course.
Okay. You referenced a 2-child policy in China.
Yes.
Can you explain something about a little bit about that?
Okay, the 1-child policy has been in effect now for many years. In fact, I don't really remember when the 1-child policy started. But because of a shortage in the workforce in China now, because of the 1-child policy, and it has created many other problems. When you try to change God's law, you always make a mistake, and that's what has happened. The ratio of men to women is 8 to 10. Well, what does that mean? That means that 50 million men do not have wives. Every hotel in China is a brothel. So, you know, it's horrible. But here's the thing. On the 2-child policy, in order to get the workforce back up to where they would like to have the workforce, they have said, okay, if the father and the mother both came from 1-child families, they can have 2 children. But if they did not come from a 1-child family, because many in the rural areas of China will have 4 or 5 children, but they can't enforce it, what do? You can't kill them. They used to, but they don't anymore. So they are still restricting to limit the number of children that are coming into the world in China. So it's going to continue to be a severe problem. To make up the workforce, it's going to take many years to come back up to what they want. So the 2-child policy helps very small amount, very limited.
So for every 10 men, there's 8 women.
That's right.
So that ratio being out of whack, I'm sure that creates social problems. I mean, we said already that the men don't have 50 million men don't have wives.
That's right.
So prostitution and things like that are running rampant in the country.
Just rampant.
Oh,
unbelievable.
And with that, I'm sure that creates some struggles within the church, even.
Yes.
As well.
It does. It does.
With there being so many more men than there are women, how does that affect the church?
Well, it affects the church in the way of the stability of the family. You know, a good family makes a strong church. Well, when the family unit is broken and destroyed, it hurts. Another thing that is involved in this thing is that when the mother leaves and goes to another province to marry another man and leaves the child with no one but a grandmother, and sometimes the orphan is taking care of the grandmother and the grandfather. Now, in most of the churches, and I think this is all over the world, it's everywhere I've been in the mission field before, women make up most of the congregations, 80% in most cases. Women are more religious than men. One man has said the only reason God gave men the leadership in the church was that he's hoping that they would keep up with the women. To some degree, I think he has a point there, but not really.
But it does seem that way from time to time.
Yes, it does. It does. So you need that family unit in the church in order for it to succeed. And when you break the family apart and one is dead and the other one goes to marry another person, it destroys the church and it destroys the family. These little orphans have a hard life. They're carrying some heavy baggage. And sometimes they will just cry and cry and cry. Why did my mother desert me? You know, and that's kind of painful.
Yeah.
Very painful.
It doesn't matter where you live, where you're from. Desertion leaves scars that run deep.
It does.
And our hearts definitely go out to those children who have to deal with that.
That's correct. Very difficult.
So with all these orphans, what kind of life do they have after they've been brought into the orphanage? Do they have much of a chance for a good, productive life after that?
Oh yes, we have some that are lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, the whole gamut. I know one that's a chemical engineer. We gave them an opportunity that they would have never had if they had not been in the program.
And how many of those children become faithful Christians as they grow up?
I would say probably 60%. I don't think the fallout rate is as high as it is in the United States. In the United States today, in the Brotherhood of the Churches of Christ, we're losing 81% of our young people before they reach university age. And that's pretty disturbing. So it's a better percentage in China, but it's not as good as we'd like. At least it's not as bad as the United States.
So there's definitely some opportunities there.
Definitely are.
So in thinking and talking about things that people in the U.S. can do to help the church there, not visiting the underground congregations.
Correct.
And trying to keep them off the government's radar.
That's right.
Possible support of the Beijing congregation.
Definitely.
We've got the Orphans and the work that's being done there, and we've got the benevolence work.
That's right.
That's done in conjunction with other organizations. So there's lots of opportunities there for the church to have an impact.
That's correct.
What do you see in the little time we have left as the future of the church in China?
I think the future is very bright, depending on how severe this latest. During the 19 years that I've worked in China, I've seen periods of time where they try to suppress Christianity and where they slack off on it. The last year has been the most severe year. How can we predict the future? I don't know. There's going to be a change in the top leadership of the Communist Party pretty soon, a new leader. Will he be as hard? Probably so. They know it's a threat. Therefore, they're not going to let up, probably. But the church will continue to exist, and it will continue to prosper. I'm sure of that.
Sounds like they need our prayers as much as anything.
That's correct. They really do.
Well, Ron, thanks so much for sitting down with us and talking about the things going on in China and the work there. Very fascinating, and because of the situation there, it's hard sometimes to really know what's happening there. But good to know that the Lord's work continues and has a chance to prosper in years to come. Thanks so much for spending your time with us, and thank you for watching, and join us again next time on A Preacher and His Work.